I remember the first time I spoke in public about careers. I was 14 years old and I was leaving a party at the East End United Community Center in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. My friends had congregated on a wall outside of the event and someone posed the question, what do you want to do when you get out of school? I was 14. So one by one, my friends began to jump off the wall and acknowledge what it was that they wanted to do when they got out of school. My best friend Tori Epps was with me, and when he jumped off the wall, he said that he wanted to be a professional football player and play in the NFL. And I remember saying to myself, wow, professional football player, that's outstanding. But what are the odds of that? Like, how astronomical are the odds of someone becoming a professional football player? So I called myself playing it safe. When I jumped off the wall, I said, I want to be a businessman, you know, a CEO. And that started my career journey for workforce diversity. You see, my name is Kenneth L. Johnson, and I'm the president of East Coast Executives, the world's leading diversity recruitment firm. Now, some of you may be wondering, what's a diversity recruitment firm? And that's easy, I can explain. Companies reach out to us when they're interested in adding diverse talent to their recruitment pipelines. I love my job. I honestly believe that when we're successful at placing diverse talent at great companies, the whole workplace gets better. But it's interesting. What I discovered through this process is that companies have started to come to us and say, hey, Ken, we're really interested in working with your firm because we understand the business case for diversity. We know that diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams and have an impact on the bottom line. We know that diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams and have an impact to the bottom line. We know that if our workforce is diverse, we can connect with our customers and end users and have an impact on the bottom line. All of that's true, and that's outstanding. But it made me wonder, why is it that when companies want to hire people of color or people from underrepresented groups, there has to be some type of financial gain on the back end? Why is it that there has to be some financial variable for people to hire diverse talent? I started my firm as a recruitment firm on September 3rd, 2001. This is what I call my transparency talk. You see, 8 days later, on September 11th, 2001, we were experiencing the attacks on the World Trade Center. So I was sitting in my living room in South Philadelphia, and I'm watching the TV of the despair that's taking place in Lower Manhattan. And finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to turn the TV off. But I grabbed a magazine on my table to read, and it was a Black Enterprise magazine. And basically, as I'm reading the magazine, I come across an article on a gentleman named Kenneth Chenault. You see, a couple months prior, Mr. Chenault had accepted or earned the role of CEO of American Express. Wow, a black man was CEO of American Express. I was ecstatic. And then as I continued to read on, I realized that Mr. Chenault was only the third African-American male to become CEO of a Fortune 500 company ever. I was shocked. Hold on. In the history of the Fortune 500, there's only been 3 African-American CEOs, right? Okay. So much for my decision to jump off that wall and say I was going to be a CEO, right? Wow. It was amazing to me. But as history and racism would prove, I shouldn't have been shocked at all. Because even today, in 2018, there are still only 3 African-American males that lead Fortune 500 companies. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to make this a black and white issue at all. The numbers are equally as depressing for other underrepresented groups, right? So what I decided to do, I said to myself, well, you know, it doesn't look like I'm going to be CEO, but just to understand the odds, my friend that I spoke about that jumped off the wall and said he wanted to be a professional football player, well, he actually made it. Rest in peace, my bro. He actually made it to the NFL, right? So in 2001, when we decided that we were going to be a diversity recruitment firm, I basically said, if I can't be the CEO of one, I'll work extremely hard to ensure that other people get the opportunity to achieve their career aspirations and dreams, right? So every year, for the last 16 years, to celebrate our anniversary, every September 11th, we start the process of calling every company in the Fortune 500 just to see if they're interested in working with a small boutique diversity recruiting firm out of Harlem, New York. Every company, we call 500 companies in September, just to see if they're willing to work for us. Now again, I'm 100% clear that the higher levels at the Fortune 500 companies are overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly white. But again, it's not a black and white issue at all. Let me explain. So as I mentioned to you, less than 1% of Fortune 500 CEOs are African Americans, right? Less than 2% are Latino. Less than 2% are Asian. Less than 5% are women. So what do we do? All right, so typically, if you want to solve a problem, you start to gather all the information you can, and then you address the issue accordingly, right? So here's what happens. We know what the top ranks of the Fortune 500 looks like. We know what's happening in the C-suite. But how about all the other employees that work for Fortune 500 companies? What does that picture look like? Fortune 500 companies employ 28 million people. So we just wanted to know what the ranks look like from a diversity data standpoint. So Fortune magazine decided to reach out to all the Fortune 500 companies to receive diversity data, which shouldn't have been hard because all of these companies are required to report diversity data to the Department of Labor. And by diversity data, that's data on gender, race, and job category. All 500 have to report it to the Department of Labor. So here's what happened when Fortune reached out. It was a game of hide and seek. 16 of the Fortune 500 companies released complete diversity data. 3% of the companies in the Fortune 500 cared enough about the issues of diversity and inclusion to release the data. 400 of the companies released no data at all. So what do? All right, well, I guess it's time to hold the CEOs accountable. You see, you can go to any of these companies' websites and pull up their diversity and inclusion mission. They'll tell you that they are strong proponents of diversity and inclusion. They'll tell you in their mission about how diverse their workforce is and how important that is to them. They call themselves equal opportunity employers, but they don't want to release the data to prove that to be either true or false. In 2017, 450 CEOs came together and they formed what they call the Diversity and Inclusion Action Initiative. What makes this a little different is that instead of looking at diversity and inclusion from a competitive standpoint, from a financial advantage, they decided that they wanted to look at diversity and inclusion and look at its societal impact. Now that's a platform that we can work with. You see, when East Coast Executives started, we've always been the firm that looked at diversity for its societal impact. We always believed that everybody, if everybody had an opportunity to work a career and to grow in their career, it would just be better for the workplace and society as a whole. So these CEOs have gotten together and they've made a pledge to look at diversity and think about its societal impact. Now, I think that'll actually work if the commitment's real. What can we do individually? Well, what I'm going to ask from you guys is that when you return back to your workplace, take a look at your company's diversity and inclusion mission. And if you think your company's doing a great job, it's fine. That's great. But if you think they're falling short in any way, I'm going to ask you to hold the leaders of your organization accountable. I'm going to ask you to start the conversation about diversity and inclusion. I'm going to ask you to support diversity initiatives, not only in your workplace, but in your community. I honestly believe that if we do that, and we combine that with the work of the CEO Diversity and Inclusion Action Initiative, we can all become the face of workplace diversity. My name's Kenneth L. Johnson. I believe I'm the world's #1 diversity recruiter, and I've just recruited you to be the face of workplace diversity. Thank you.